Good evening once again, ladies and gentlemen. For the benefit, welcome to this Area 2 Planning Committee. For the benefit of those watching on our YouTube channel, members of the committee are present in the chamber. These members will be voting on proposals this evening. Other members of the council are also in attendance and or participating via MS Teams and can take part in any discussions, ask questions, but not vote. Your attention is drawn to agenda item 1, which sets out the guidance on how meetings will be conducted, including the ground rules. Your attention is also drawn to the rules for public speaking in respect of planning applications and committee procedure rules in the council's constitution, which apply to this planning committee meeting. I note that there has been a lot of public interest in the planning application on the agenda tonight, so for me to be able to effectively manage the meeting, I would appreciate if the members of the public and councillors speaking tonight only deal with the planning application before us and not stray onto other matters. Please be advised that this is a meeting held in public and not a public meeting or rally. Members of the public are very welcome to join us to observe the formal meeting, but should not be disruptive. I do not wish to hear any applause or other noises of support or derision for any speakers, be they public or committee members. If, as a member of the public, you feel you will not be able to contain yourself, there is a committee room at the other side of the entrance where officers have set up a screen where you can view proceedings. When invited to speak, speakers must come to the microphone in front of the committee and not speak from the public area. Before we start the formal business, we will confirm attendance of voting members by doing a roll call. Over to you, Vicky.
Thank you. Councillor Palmer.
Present.
Apologies have been received from Councillor Brown. Councillor Banks.
Present.
Apologies have been received from James. Apologies have also been received from Fine. Apologies have been received from Boxall. Apologies have been received from his Fine. Councillor Crisp.
Present.
Councillor Dean.
Present.
Apologies have been received from Councillor Harman. And Buck. Loud.
Present.
Apologies received from Councillor Tanner. Councillor Tatton.
Present.
Apologies been received from Councillor Taylor, who is participating.
Michael? Right, and we would like to introduce our officers.
Good evening, members. James Bailey, Head of Planning.
Robin Gilbert, Major Projects Team Leader.
And Joy, I can never pronounce your surname. I'm really sorry.
Okay. Joy Ukadike, Head of Legal Services. Thank you.
We've gone through apologies. The rest are present. Declarations of interest from anybody? Councillor Tunn.
Yes, I just wanted to declare exactly the same as I had last time, that at the time the application went in, I was the clerk to Teesside Parish Council, but I didn't have any involvement in their response. And also, I think I declared an interest in relation to the being a parish councillor, but again, not having any involvement in the parish council obtaining heritage evidence.
Round.
I'm also a parish councillor for Eastbourne and Larkfield.
Okay, we move on to the minutes of our last meeting. Is everybody happy with the minutes? Councillor Tanton.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just a very minor correction in relation to the grounds of refusal as they were agreed at the meeting or set out at the meeting. There's just a slight omission in relation to the barn at Huntley Cottage that was removed from the detail, and also the there was a correction with the MDE. I think it is at the end of. I've spoken to Victoria about those matters.
Okay, Victoria, are you happy with those amendments? You've got them.
No, that's fine.
Okay, apart from that couple of amendments, is everybody else happy with the rest of the minutes that we came? Can I have agreement, please? Yep. Let's move on. Excuse me 1 minute. Once again, we only have one application before us this evening. And Robert, it was a long night. Robin, would you like to? Sorry, we were here till midnight last night from 7:15. Robin, would you like to do your summary of the application?
Thank you, Chair. Members will recall that this application was deferred from committee last month as set out in the published committee papers. As a reminder, the application seeks outline planning permission with all matters reserved except for access for up to 52 dwellings, of which 40% would be affordable. The development is in outline form, which means that the application is dealing with the principle of residential development on the site, with only the details of the access for consideration at this time. All other matters would be subject to future consideration through reserved matters, subject to the approval of the outline planning permission. The application has been amended since first reported in September 2024 to move the access 4 metres to the south to increase the opportunity for screening to the northern boundary. As set out in the report, the council cannot presently demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, which means that the presumption in favour of sustainable development test set out in paragraph 11 of the MPPF falls to be applied. The detailed discussion on this is contained in the report, but in summary, the application falls to be assessed under Part D of paragraph 11. The test in this case is whether or not there are any adverse impacts of granting planning permission that would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the MPPF taken as a whole. The proposed development would provide a policy-compliant development of up to 52 residential dwellings. It would also provide 40% affordable housing on site, which would contribute to addressing a recognised need for affordable housing in the borough. Overall, and for the reasons set out throughout the report, it is considered that there would be no adverse impacts of granting planning permission for the development that would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits that the development would bring when assessed against the policies in the framework taken as a whole. It is therefore recommended that outline planning permission be granted, subject to the finalisation of a legal agreement securing off-site open space, education and community facilities and medical practice services, and the planning conditions set out to ensure that development comes forward in an acceptable and high quality fashion. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Do you want to add that in, or you want to add?
Members will be aware in your papers. There's obviously a supplementary report from the officer which just says there's 3 additional objections. 3 objections on matters previously set out in the papers. So that's just in the supplementary papers. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So we will start with our public speakers. From the Parish Council of Teeston, we have Peter Cooling. Thank you. You know where we're going.
I'm Chairman, Teesson Parish Council. At your 15th of January meeting, you voted to refuse this application, but officers blocked that and are now wielding the big constitutional stick to frustrate your intended refusal. Several years ago in NBC, we experienced a similar device being inserted into our constitution after officers were thwarted by members voting against officers' advice. However, that device only extends to deferral to the next planning committee meeting, at which, after advice on cost implications by officers, a decision is taken with no subsequent referral to full council. In T&M, officers have gone belt and braces by inserting into your constitution, with presumably members' agreement, ultimate referral to full council if this time you again vote to refuse. At your prior meeting, we heard that T&M has a successful track record in resisting appeals, but this meeting's papers have only given one in January 2025. Is that in accordance with your recollection, or is that report selective in terms of time period and focusing only on Area 2 Planning Committee? If this application is permitted, there will be additional traffic not only through East Malling, but also along Waterbury Road to and from the Air Quality Challenge Waterbury traffic lights and to and from the narrow, steep, non-pavemented Malling Road linking Teesson with Teesson Bridge, a significant cross-country route. Encouraged by this precedent, future applications on either side of Waterbury Road will come forward, exacerbating these problems. In your later private session, officers will no doubt describe dire consequences of again refusing, but you may wish to assert that your borough needs to stand firm on certain matters and that this application, if approved, points in strategic direction with severe adverse consequences for East Malling and neighbouring villages. You may also wish to chide officers for clearly being reluctant at your prior meeting to assist compilation and definition of a comprehensive list of grounds for refusal. In fact, it should be asked whether directly affected members amongst you were consulted by officers before publishing their list of grounds, or did they act unilaterally, presumably with their own bias against refusing coming to the fore. And that is despite officers having the responsibility to advise while members decide. While noting the many absences for whatever reasons, we ask you please to stand firm and again vote for refusal, then eventually asking full council support, with officers then being instructed to do their professional best to resist any appeal. Officers advise, members decide. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jeffrey Kenwood.
Right, no apology for repeating what I said before. Once this orchard's gone, it's gone forever. Please remember that in your deliberations. Do you really want to see housing instead of greenery? This orchard may be next to the village, but it is countryside, and orchards are what the Garden of England and East Malling's all about. This orchard is at the start of the countryside and is the first evidence you can see of the garden. I'm fortunate to live in Belvedere House, Belvedere Farm. The name indicates the beautiful view which will be replaced by housing. This is one of 3 farms immediately beyond the conservation area. The orchard is the largest of those. The developer tells us there will be a net gain in biodiversity. How? The government guidelines say that orchards are very biodiverse and should be kept where possible. A brick, tarmac and concrete development cannot compete with what we have in this orchard. Various deer, turtle doves, little owls, nuthatch, firecrest, birds of prey, 35 bird species. It's a long list. Small mammals, shrews, field mice, voles and their predators. The pear orchard, part of the site, is stated to be a biodiversity gain. How so? It's already there. The site is an essential part of the buffer betwixt Kings Hill, the quarry and developments to the east. If given permission, we shall soon see a town stretching from Kings Hill all the way to Maidstone, giving a complete loss of individuality to the villages. To make an informed judgment, you'll have had to had a visit. Only then will you understand why that visit was necessary. If you have not seen it, How can you vote? To appreciate the site, you must try to park your car, then walk up the hill on a very narrow path. It's scary. Walk to Ivy Farm, avoiding the nettles and giant hogweed, hoping a car mirror will not swipe you on the way. Now you may appreciate the site for what it is, a diverse, rural landscape. Delve further, view where the badger set was criminally destroyed. Walk the orchard, see wildlife, and now understand the issues from the orchard, of the road and traffic above you, and from the footpath beside you. Scattered about is the debris from multiple car collisions and car-thrown detritus. You will also see why the access proposed is dangerous, especially when cars are parked, thus making the display inadequate. The footpath is dangerous. KCC says it's too dangerous to maintain. How then can a considered increase in its use be contemplated? In 10 years, the footpath has only been cleared twice, both recent and oddly enough to coincide with the planning meetings. Only once have I seen signage maintenance. The signs are then quickly obscured by plants. Please search your consciences before voting for this plan. How can it be justified that a housing estate has greater diversity than an orchard? Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mark Crowcroft.
I'm Mark Crowcroft. My wife and I are the proud owners of Grade 2 listed farmhouse Huntley Cottage. We strongly object to this application. We are custodians of a historical and beautiful property and take our heart in our role in the protection of its heritage and that of its surroundings. Our home was built in the early 1600s, and I think it's worthwhile to put this in a sense of perspective. It was built roughly at the time of James I and Oliver Cromwell. Shakespeare just passed away in 1616. The Gunpowder Plot was in 1605, and of course the Great Fire of London in 1666. The word heritage is important too, relating to historic things of historic and cultural value that are worthy of preservation. Architectural heritage provides a tangible link to history and allows us to understand and appreciate the achievements and values and lifestyles of the past. For the last 400 years, every plan of this area has included our home in one form or another, and the stunning surroundings, orchards, fields, and woods. For 400 years, it has stood as a gateway to the countryside village of East Malling. The fact that this house has been highlighted in all the heritage reports relating to this development amplifies the relevance of it in this proposal, which it is said repeatedly that Huntley Cottage is unaffected, visually not disturbed by the development, the housing, and the building works. This could not be further from the truth. We are going to be completely affected by the introduction of 52 houses opposite this historic house. Everything about this development proposal is a negative. The views and nature that surrounds the cottage is not a separate entity. Collectively, they are part of the culture and heritage of this precious location. There is a serious danger that our Grade 2 listed farmhouse will look upon a building site and then a housing estate. My wife and I work for an international company with strong British heritage founded in 1870. And on so many occasions, our colleagues across the world remark on how lucky we are to be surrounded by history, greenery, nature, and heritage culture. We are incredibly proud of this. And this is why we chose to move to the area and into Huntley Cottage. Can you comfortably sit there and say in 10 years' time that we still have the pride that in where we live? This is your contribution to maintaining what Kent stands for, with all its qualities that so many people admire. In the future, will Kent still be the Garden of England? Not if this development goes ahead. You are responsible for protecting our heritage and maintaining its lasting legacy. Are we going to be the last generation to remember this area as a historic place of beauty it is, or are commercial gains going to make us blind to what we have and how lucky we are? As it was said in the plannings before, the development is in the wrong development in the wrong place, and this is purely not based on heritage aspect. It fundamentally will not work. There is no infrastructure, no shops, insufficient public transport, lack of safe paving, walking, lack of lighting to help anyone. Narrow roads are already saturated and dangerous, and nothing points to this being the right solution for this village. We're in danger of destroying this beautiful. Please object to this. please.
Thank you. Mrs. Saunders?
Good evening. I have talked a lot about badgers at the previous meetings. West Kent Badger Group will be addressing the committee this evening, but I wanted to just mention a few key points before I move on to talk about heritage and costs. The photos I have mailed members yesterday of the badger set show clearly the 20-metre claimed buffer zone is substantially less than this, as the badgers have dug 10 metres into the buffer following the attempted destruction of the set in 2022. These entrances are not outliers that is being claimed by the developer. It's clear from the photos they are active set entrances and interconnected with the woodland entrances. By moving the proposed access road 4 metres to the south, this is now even closer to the set than originally proposed. And with the grading of the road, that would need to be achieved with a 1.5 metre drop from Waterbury Road. There will be no option to increase the buffer if the application is approved today and access is not a reserved matter. This will in effect leave the badgers with 10 metres of the within 10 metres of the main access road, and it is unlikely Natural England would approve a licence under these circumstances, which clearly would be needed. UK law is clear that planning authorities must be certain licences will be granted before granting planning permission. I now want to move on to talk about other matters. There is a misleading narrative that is being pushed by planning leadership in this council that planning law is set in stone and their advice is sacrament. Much of the planning law is subjective, and the facts show that planning officials are no better at judging how the planning inspectorate will view that subjectivity than planning committees are. Yet members are being told that if they go against officers' advice, that there is certainty that the council will lose at appeal. This is not backed up by the facts. TNBC's own report in March 2024 found that of the £81,000 of appeal costs awarded against TNBC at that time, the vast majority, 70,000, was attributed to planning officials' delegated decision making and not caused by planning committees voting against officers' recommendations. Clearly, even experienced planning officers struggle to assess these subjective elements and get it wrong fairly regularly. Given this, it is important to consider that the proposed grounds of refusal for Ivy Farm mainly fall within the subjective areas of character and heritage impact. At yesterday's full council, I posed a question on conservation areas and how this council have over many decades neglected these important heritage assets and failed to comply with their statutory duties. I believe there was some acceptance of this in the response, and it was heartening to hear Councillor Taylor offer his personal reassurances that he will do his utmost to try to prioritise this, which hopefully will start to turn the tide. But this will not come quickly enough for East Malling. Our village's heritage is already threatened by extreme pressures from speculative developments on all fronts due to the village's position in the Medway strategic gap.
Our next speaker is Natasha Allen.
Good evening. Our family home is right next door to this proposed development site, and sadly for us, immediately next to the proposed access road. We are not objecting to our loss of view. We are objecting due to our total loss of privacy and overlooking caused by the raised access road. This piece of land was a blank canvas. The access road could have gone anywhere, and yet the developer and planners have decided the best place for it is alongside our boundary, and it will run like a bridge, 1.5 metres above our garden and over a foot above the top of our fence. Pedestrians' head height is almost 10 feet above the level of our garden and enables them to look into the full height windows of our house and the entirety of our private back garden. Vehicles will have a similar or higher outlook. Why is this access road located here? Since the application went live in 22, many more of the trees have fallen in high winds, and there is a very large gap further south, a much safer place for an access road. The loss of enjoyment of our private garden spaces, light pollution and invasion of privacy is totally preventable, disproportionately severe, and will have a profoundly detrimental impact on our mental health and general quality of life. Our children have already said that they won't want to use their garden because their every move will be seen by strangers. How can we feel relaxed and secure knowing that we are on full public display? From the road and pathways that will loom over our property, would you allow it next to your house? As in the case of Fern versus Tate 2023, the Supreme Court ruled that overlooking by strangers constitutes a legal nuisance and a violation of privacy and interferes with residents' rights to privacy under Article 8 of the 98 Human Rights Act. We are advised this established case law is grounds to legally challenge the position of this access road, and I would ask you to include the risk of judicial review in your deliberations and not just the risk of developer appeal costs. Mr. Bailey tried to downplay our loss of privacy by stating that our garden is large. The access road is 9 metres from our garden, 21 metres from the side of my house. The distance in the Supreme Court ruling was over 34 metres. Overlooking from the road will be day and night, all day, every single day. Lights from vehicles using the access road will strobe and shine into the front, side and rear bedroom windows. Our autistic son is triggered by light disturbance, and his rear bedroom window will be directly affected. The additional air, light and noise pollution will have a profoundly negative impact on the enjoyment of our home, and this constant and permanent visual intrusion is a severe infringement of our rights of privacy and constitutes a clear statutory nuisance. As these are material planning considerations, we respectfully urge you to carefully consider the impact of this development to access road in this position when voting. I ask only.
Good evening. Our home is directly next to Ivy Farm and has enjoyed the visual amenity and rural character of this location for almost 100 years. We have rights of vehicle access over this site, which the applicant ignores. It is outside the confines of the village, within the countryside, where fly tipping an urban housing estate will adversely affect the setting of the conservation area and the surrounding listed and non-designated heritage assets. It is totally unsustainable, and from 16 years' experience living here, is totally car dependent. Councillor Hudson remarked these are the wrong houses in the wrong place. Previously, members were steered away from a refusal vote by stating our garden land was subject to enforcement action. Following a stage 3 complaint, we received a sincere apology from the Chief Executive. No enforcement action was taken, and the status of our garden was regularised by way of a change of use approval as mentioned in the report. However, missing from the report are the conditions removing our rights to erect any fencing, quoting the following reasons: to protect the visual amenity and the rural character of the locality. How then can officers recommend you approve a development that will totally destroy the very same visual amenity and rural character that their conditions are imposed to protect? Members are being asked to approve an access road despite having gone to great lengths to ensure this doesn't happen from MOD land opposite the North Pole pub just up the road. East Malling Trust have written to residents of Waterbury Road asking them to sell their land to facilitate access for housing development. Their land directly adjoins this site and stretches between Sweets Lane and Rocks Road. In reality, this isn't just an access road to 52 houses, it's access to many more hectares of land that were surveyed for development in 2024. Drawings provided by the developer are totally misleading, and there are insufficient details regarding the access road. It seems officers are suggesting these details can be fudged once approval has been granted, but we all know how badly this can go given the current problems resulting in a lack of elevation detail at 40 acres and relying on Kent Highway's so-called expert advice. The fact that officers have stepped in to stop a site visit speaks volumes. No one in their right mind who has walked up from the high street would approve this application. Members are being denied the sensible option of a site visit.
and vital evidence to support a refusal is missing from the report. This site leads to a bottleneck in both directions. Head south, you hit the highly polluted Wateringbury Crossroads. North is a protected medieval village whose roads are described in the Bradbourne application as being at saturation point. It is a dangerously narrow road with narrow, incomplete pathways and a history of accidents. This site couldn't be more unsuitable for a housing estate, and I respectfully ask members to vote to refuse this application. East Malling desperately needs measures to reduce traffic volume. The last thing it needs is even more traffic.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Catherine Moore.
Chair, councillors and officers, tonight's decision is not just about this development, although the objections do outweigh the benefits regarding this proposal. This meeting is about whether this council is following the law or merely enforcing directives without scrutiny. My first point, transparency breach, housing crisis without evidence. I submitted a Freedom of Information request demanding evidence of the housing shortage used to justify this development. The information has not been fully provided. The Kent County Council response has already admitted that there is no clear data on housing waiting lists, including the residency status of applicants. Without verified figures, how can this development be lawfully justified? Legal breach. The Local Government Act of 1999 mandates councils to make decisions based on best value and public transparency. How is approving a major development without disclosing the actual need meeting this requirement? My second point is planning policy breach, affordable housing that isn't affordable. The new NPPF states that 50% of homes must be affordable, yet no clear definition has been provided. Will these homes be prioritised for local residents? Will they be council owned or private developer stock? Legal breach, the Public Sector Equality Duty, which is the Equality Act of 2010, requires councils to ensure policies do not disproportionately impact local residents. Approving a vague developer-led affordable housing scheme without scrutiny may be unlawful. Point 3, net zero enforcement, no legal basis. This development claims to align with net zero policies, yet the UK contributes less than 1% of global CO2 emissions, rendering local enforcement meaningless. Legal breach. The Climate Change Act of 2008 requires local policies to be proportionate and evidence-based. What scientific or economic analysis has this council conducted to justify development targets under net zero? If none exist, this policy lacks legal standing. My final challenge, legal risk of approval. If this council is concerned about losing an appeal and incurring costs, then it must also consider the legal risks of approving a development that fails to meet statutory transparency, accountability and fairness standards. If this application is approved without addressing these illegal concerns, councillors must be prepared to justify their individual liability for breaching planning laws, transparency regulations and public sector duties. This is not just about planning. This is about whether decisions here are lawful, democratic and accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. I will withhold my comments on that one. Our next speaker is Ruth Calderwood, who is online.
Yes, thank you very much.
I will start the timer when you start to speak. You have 3 minutes.
Thanks very much. So I'm representing the West Kent Badger Group, which is a group of volunteers that work to protect badgers and promote their welfare across West Kent. This includes trying to ensure that they're protected where new development takes place. The committee is aware that there's a large badger set on the edge of the woodland to the northeast of this site, and that the entrance holes to the set encroach into the site itself. The badger report submitted as part of this application details badger set holes on the site, 6.5 metres into the site from the perimeter. However, badgers are active, and since this survey was completed, we've been advised that the badgers have dug new entrance holes further into the site. This all means that the proposed buffer of 20 metres from the site boundary to protect the set is insufficient. The National Planning Policy Framework 2024 states that when determining planning applications, local planning authorities should apply the principle that if significant harm to biodiversity resulting from a development cannot be avoided, mitigated, or at last resort compensated for, then the planning permission should be refused. And Natural England's standing advice in relation to badgers and the legal protection is that local authorities should consider if the developer has taken appropriate measures to comply with the requirements of the NPPF. It's our view that whilst badgers have been considered to a certain extent, the proposals don't afford sufficient protection to meet these requirements. As such, the West Kent Badger Group requests that should the outline application be approved, the following conditions are applied. Number one, that a further badger survey is conducted by a qualified ecologist. Number two, the buffer zone is reconsidered following the survey and any new design layout is agreed before any work commences on site. And number three, the steps outlined in the developer's badger report to protect badgers during construction are adhered to. Just to finish off, we're aware that you're looking at a 20-metre buffer zone for this site, but the Badger Trust has a development guide which recommends that heavy machinery isn't used within 30 metres of a set entrance and lighter machinery within 20. And these distances are generally used as a guide to recommend different buffer zones around sets. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sharon Page. Sorry, it's to be read out by Martin Bagley. Yes, I can say that's not Sharon Page.
Good evening. The proposed development of 52 houses on land to the south of East Malling village would have a profound and irreversible impact on the village's historical and rural character. East Malling has a long-standing association with the fruit industry, and this land plays a vital role in maintaining the village's identity, heritage, and connection to its agricultural roots. Historically, East Malling was surrounded by Kentish orchards, contributing to the village's rural setting. Over time, housing estates have encroached upon this landscape, eroding the rural nature of the area. The land to the south of the village, where the proposed development is located, is one of the last remaining expanses of open agricultural land that contributes positively to the setting of the East Malling Conservation Area. Developing this site would destroy the rural backdrop that has defined the village and its historic core for centuries. The significance of this open land is not merely visual, but also historical. East Malling Conservation Area assessment recognises that the agricultural land contributes to the open rural character that defines the area. If the land were developed, it would undermine this character and disrupt the landscape that has supported the village for generations. In addition to the loss of rural landscape, the proposed development would severely affect the village's historic built environment. The increase in traffic from an additional 100,000 vehicle movements per year would negatively impact the village's heritage assets. The increase in noise, vibration, fumes, and traffic load on the narrow single-track road leading into the village would harm both the character and appearance of the conservation area. This would not only be detrimental to the aesthetics, but also to the preservation of East Malling's historic structures such as Huntley Cottage, Ivy House Farmhouse and Belvedere Oast, plus other Grade 2 listed properties. Furthermore, the development would compromise the village's rural gateway, particularly near these heritage sites. The loss of green space, trees and countryside in favour of a housing estate would result in the destruction of essential aspects of East Malling's identity. In conclusion, the development of these 52 houses would irreparably damage the unique historical, cultural and environmental value of East Malling. It would disrupt the connection between the village and its agricultural heritage, degrade its conservation area and harm the surrounding heritage properties. The need for more housing should not come at the cost of the community's heritage and rural character. strongly urge that this development be reconsidered with the preservation of East Malling's heritage and landscape as the top priority. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Yvonne Moss. The button on the right, and I'll start timing your 3 minutes when you start speaking.
Good evening. I object to this application on the grounds of highway safety due to increased traffic and damage to nearby heritage assets as a result. I've lived in East Malling High Street for 25 years in a 16th century timber-framed farmhouse, Grade 2 listed building, which directly fronts the road. There is nothing to protect the house from traffic other than a single bollard, so no pavement, no wall, no garden. Traffic is incredibly close to the house, which has been hit several times, the last vehicle coming directly through the wall into the house. Since this event, we do not feel safe using this room for fear of the same thing happening again due to the speed and close proximity of the traffic. The volume of traffic has increased horrendously since then due to overdevelopment in the area, including along Hermitage Lane and Kings Hill. Also, future traffic generated from other developments, such as 40 Acres, the Sweetings, Clare Lane, will further increase this. As Hermitage Lane and the A228 are often congested, traffic is using the restricted narrow roads of East Malling as an alternative to travel between the A20 and the A26, with little or no regard to the speed limit or heritage assets, just as long as they get there as fast as possible. There is no pavement outside our house or any of the houses on the right-hand side as you travel up the hill along Chapel Street towards Wateringby Road. Reaching our letterbox is directly on the road and is incredibly dangerous. The overhanging roof of our listed building has been damaged by large vehicles trying to squeeze through very close to the house. It has not been helped by KCC moving the double yellow lines closer to our property. Residents like myself living in properties with no pavement outside are forced to cross the road, which is often difficult and dangerous. Pavement on the other side of the road is very narrow, only 2 to 3 feet in some places, and not wide enough for 2 people to safely walk side by side or pass one another without the risk of being hit due to the close proximity of the traffic. These conditions apply to both the High Street and Chapel Street as you head towards Ivy Farm, with many listed buildings and a listed wall lining the route. I've recently carried out my own traffic counts in the High Street, and there have been between 700 to 800 vehicles an hour travelling up and down the High Street during the morning and evening rush hour periods. Most of the traffic from Ivy Farm would be using Chapel Street and the High Street to travel towards the shops and medical facilities, and therefore exacerbate the risk of damage to heritage assets and to personnel due to the narrow roads with narrow pavements and listed buildings. East Malling is not suitable for this, and any further increase in traffic would be very detrimental. I therefore urge you to reject this application.
Thank you. Next speaker is Stephen Lockett.
Good evening, I'm Steve Lockett. I've lived in the Rocks Road, East Malling for 33 years. I must say, in the last few years, I've felt under siege in all directions for development. Thank you to the councillors that previously voted against this application. I hope that you will all vote against it tonight. I was heartened to see that a development in Thanet similar to this application was recently rejected by the planning inspector. Thanet also cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of houses. The site in Foxborough Lane is just outside Minster on farmland, and in the area it has a much quieter road system compared to that of East Malling. Inspector David Wallace rejected the appeal by, quote, "The proposal would give rise to intensification of pedestrian movements, increasing the probability of an accident. It does not appear to be a busy cut through like East Malling. It does not have the commercial traffic flow we experience coming from Amazon, DHL, etc., with depots nearby. They all use it as a shortcut to travel south to Alresford. On Tuesday, a young girl was struck by a van while walking on the pavement in East Malling. The van did not stop, the police are aware. And as previously been discussed, there's been numerous car accidents and damage to property. The pavement in Chapel Street at many points is only between 70 centimetres at the Rocks Road end, which is on a dangerous bend, and in many places only 80 centimetres wide, with obstructions by telegraph poles and street lamps. When I measured the road today, 2 cars and a van were also obstructing the pavement, necessitating going round. A typical van mirror projects 25 centimetres, leaving little or no room clear for pedestrians, making it particularly hazardous for those with children, pushchairs and mobility issues. There is no possibility to widen the pavement and modify the road to improve safety. It is a narrow road just passable for 2 cars, but vans and lorries, to pass, they must mount the pavement. This application will increase the probability of accidents, just as determined in Thanet. The inspector's other grounds were, I quote, the development would harm the character and appearance of the landscape. In summing up, he said, for these reasons, the harm of the proposed development would outweigh the benefits. This can be also shown in East Malling, so it is possible to win. Also, this application is not sustainable. There is no definition of sustainable, but it has a very infrequent bus service, no disabled access to the train station, and only a pedestrian route to schools, the nursery, and limited shops, a pub and hairdressers, through a dangerous pavement. Surely the planning inspector's rejection in Thanet sets the precedent. I feel a unanimous vote today for this application by a democratically elected councillors will strengthen the case if it goes to appeal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Steve Brett.
Hi, I'm Steve Brett. I live on Gillets Lane. I'd like to focus on some points relating to travel that have been underplayed by the applicant and/or KCC Highways. The NPPF says that refusal on highways grounds should take into account all reasonable future scenarios. Even the applicant estimated an additional 21 two-way trips through the high street in the peak morning period from this 52 house development alone. KCC Highways considered the resultant extra one car every 3 minutes to be a moderate increase. However, all reasonable future scenarios must surely include further housing developments which have already been approved and are now soon to be in progress or ready to be approved. Not to mention the further applications and approvals that seem very likely based on the current trend. Again, from the NPPF, significant development should be focused on locations which are or can be made sustainable through limiting the need to travel and offering a genuine choice of transport modes. This can help to reduce congestion and emissions and improve air quality and public health. You might think 52 houses is not significant, but it really is significant for a village the size of East Malling. KCC Highways said that the site is only served by an infrequent range of services, even at peak times. It is therefore considered that sustainable transport will have a limited role in meeting the development's travel demands. Of the footpath leading into East Malling, they said the footway is below desirable widths, and its narrow width will, to some extent, discourage pedestrian trips. At its narrowest, just south of the railway bridge, this is 78 centimetres, it's barely wider than an internal domestic door. This occurs at one of the narrowest points on the road where it is not possible for 2 cars to pass simultaneously. The width is limited by a house in the conservation area, and there is no reasonable mitigating action. If you have to walk this section, you keep a very close eye on the traffic. If you have young children, you really would not want to do it. And regarding off-site highway impacts, KCC really minimised this issue, acknowledging that to some extent, existing on-street parking interrupts the flow of traffic. They failed to mention the bottleneck on Chapel Street just south of the bridge, and they do not actually use the word congestion in relation to East Malling. It seems that word is reserved for Wateringbury. Highways consider the traffic to be acceptable due to the low number of personal injury collisions, but they acknowledge this is in part due to the low traffic speeds necessitated by the existing constricted flow.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Mark Page.
Good evening. At the September meeting, I quoted facts relating to the unsustainability of this development and its non-compliance with TNBC's current climate change strategy, specifically covering the narrow footpaths and persistent vehicle incursions, making them dangerous or impassable, and the non-existent local amenities and public transport services. At the January meeting, I quoted facts relating to the traffic and road safety issues. I referred to the fatality outside Huntley Cottage and 13 other serious evidence accidents over the last 3 years between Huntley Cottage and the High Street, a distance of under 800 yards, 800 metres. The developer's DHA transport statement doesn't mention any of these accidents, as its crash data is between 4 and 9 years old, noting just 6 minor accidents between 2016 and 2021. I also highlighted the village's narrow roads weren't designed for modern day vehicle sizes and volumes, and that the frequency of vehicles obstructing footpaths to allow northbound traffic to pass just validated this. To underline this, and for the benefit of members yet to visit site, on one section of the road north of the site, the width from Bollard to the centre line of white centre line is just 195 centimetres. Ambulances, rubbish trucks, skip lorries, transit vans are between 33 and 60 centimetres wider than this. Even a domestic Range Rover is 10 centimetres wider than this. The seriousness of the situation was evident only yesterday when a schoolgirl was hit by a van mounting the southbound pavement. She sustained injuries, the driver fled, and police have been notified. This development is not sustainable and will add 100,000 vehicle movements a year, thus posing an even greater and unacceptable risk to road safety and contravening KCC's Vision Zero road safety strategy. It may be suggested these issues aren't relevant to the material planning issue of the development's access. I'd suggest they're significantly more relevant than a Squire's head of planning telling us what a wonderful award-winning local SME house builder they are. A house builder whose website states, and I quote, "We understand the harmful effects of car travel to the environment. So we encourage a greener and cleaner approach and often look to improve public transport options and providing alternative use to cars where appropriate." If this were true, they'd have never considered building here. If, however, it's just for profits, TNBC's Housing and Planning Scrutiny Select Committee should have identified in the early stages of their risk assessment that this development was illogical in so many grounds and rejected it.
Thank you. It doesn't actually go to the scrutiny committee. Sorry. We now have Andy Wilford.
Good evening, members. My name is Andrew Wilford, Head of Land and Planning at Esquire Developments. I've been in planning for over 20 years and presented at many committees in that time. I've thought long and hard about what to say tonight, and I've not taken this decision lightly. This is now my third time appearing in front of this committee in respect of this specific application. I have, over the previous two committees, tried to express how there are no statutory consultee objections and that as a local multi-award winning SME house builder, we will bring forward not only a bespoke high quality development befitting of East Malling, but will support other local businesses through our local supply chains alongside other benefits including affordable housing. I've also tried to express that we do recognise development is an emotive topic, and that due to the council failing to deliver a sufficient number of homes, needs to make the difficult and ultimately unpopular decisions to ensure that future generations have an opportunity to live in the places in which they grow up. However, instead, we find that this committee is not prepared to support the silent majority and part of its community in greatest need. This committee is failing current and future generations to protect the few that shout the loudest and those fortunate enough to already afford their own home or can afford to buy additional land or buy listed buildings well in excess of £1 million. If the committee chooses to refuse this application, it demonstrates exactly why we are in the midst of a national housing crisis and why the council is not meeting its local housing needs. This committee is part of the problem, not the solution. I fail to understand why this committee is ignoring the professional officer's advice and all statutory consultees to pursue an unsubstantiated and unjustified reason for refusal and is prepared to put at risk substantial public funds to fight an appeal. I fail to understand the committee's position on this scheme when the council has chosen not to defend a Greenbelt appeal in Hadlow for over 70 dwellings.
Thank you. It's your 3 minutes. Sorry. Yeah. That's the end of our speakers. So we now go to the committee. Who would like to speak first?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Can I just some brightness on my screen? I'm not proposing to go over everything in minute detail, bearing in mind the previous meetings that we've had, but the purpose of the deferral was for us to receive a report from the legal team, which we've had. And clearly what we need to do is approach it on the basis tonight of whether we feel the grounds of refusal can be taken forward or not. I accept that we are in tilted balance territory and therefore we need to weigh the benefits of the proposal against the harms. And depending on who you speak to, and it may not be a popular view, but we do have a recognised housing need in our borough. And if this went to appeal, the planning inspector would inevitably find that the provision of housing, including 40% affordable, would weigh heavily in the balance. In terms of the other benefits, at a recent meeting of Area 2, a lot was made of Section 106 contributions, but as I understand it, a Section 106 payment is designed to offset the impact of development. So I just make the point that if there is no development, there is no impact to offset. There might be sometimes some wider benefits, such as where you might have contributions, say for open space that is off-site, where there might be some benefit to the wider population. But generally speaking, with this application, I think we are looking at the significant benefit being the provision of homes. So that's where the benefits that I see where they lie. However, although we don't have a 5-year land supply, that doesn't mean development at any price. And it's up to us as a committee to decide how to weigh all the benefits and the harms in the balance, having regard to the policies in our local plan and in the NPPF. In considering an appeal relating to Broke Hill Golf Club at Sevenoaks, an inspector made it clear that policies that are considered to be out of date still carry significant weight if they're consistent with the NPPF. In that case, the inspector found that Sevenoaks had a chronic undersupply of housing, which was continuing to get worse. The appeal heard that the extent of the likely future land supply for the next 5 years ranged from 2.8 to 1.9 years, so certainly no better than Tunbridge and Moorings. The appeal was refused, despite the fact that that scheme would have delivered 800 homes. In terms of the grounds of refusal that we settled upon last time, the NPPF gives great weight to harm to heritage assets, whether or not that harm is substantial or less than substantial. Less than substantial doesn't mean that the harm doesn't matter. It still attracts great weight. To recap briefly, there are a number of cumulative harms identified to heritage buildings and landscape character. The applicant says there would be less than substantial harm to the conservation area and negligible harm to Belvedere Oast, with no other heritage harm. I think the conservation officer is broadly in agreement with that. But Wendy Rogers of KCC Heritage says in her reply that she's concerned that the number of proposed dwellings is contrary to the historic landscape character of dispersed farms within open linear fields. And members might remember that I spoke last time about the various historic farms sitting at the 3 points of a triangle, and the applicant's site sits effectively in the middle of that triangle, which is part of that area that maintains the separation between those farms. Of Belvedere Farm, Wendy Rogers says that although it will retain connection to the east and south with the retention of the orchard, it will be harmed by the intensive development to the north. In relation to Ivy House Farm and Huntley Cottage, the applicant accepts that the rural surroundings contribute to their significance, but concludes there would be no harm. The parish council's consultant says there would be less than substantial harm to both assets. So a difference between the opinion of the experts, but that's not altogether unusual. And we are entitled, I think, to take on board the external evidence from the parish council's expert. It has come from a recognised heritage consultant. I also spoke last time about the distinctive landscape character and the significance of the open spaces between the farms. And I've had an opportunity to refresh my memory about the landscape, the visual landscape and visual impact assessment, which says the harm at the site level and from some points on MR 107, which runs to the east across farmland, would remain moderate adverse even at year 15. And that's as a result of the visible massing and a more developed skyline. The development would be visible from Wateringbury Road through the access with views channelled into the site, especially for those heading south. The roadside hedging would go through seasonal changes so that visibility would be more apparent at some times of the year. There would be visibility from Huntley Cottage itself through the hedging and of the roof line over the top. The report says, that's the LVIA, says that the lighting would have a moderate impact across the built area of the site, where currently the sky is dark. And the overall effect would, I think, be of suburbanisation of a parcel of land that juts out into the countryside between these historic farms. In terms of sustainability, which was one of the other grounds of refusal, and just briefly, because I think Roger's going to speak on some of this, there's a whole host of reasons why development here doesn't lend itself to walking and cycling. And the residents that spoke about the traffic, it was like drawing a picture that we know that's how it exists. It will lead to dependency on the car. I think with particular problems for those in wheelchairs or who are less mobile, and for parents with buggies and children. KCC accept that the narrow pavements, as somebody quoted, will to some extent discourage pedestrian trips, and they disagreed with the applicant's claim that there is a decent range of sustainable travel options. The bus is now virtually non-existent unless you want to travel at 10:30 on a Friday and be back by lunchtime. The trains do run for twice in the peak hour, but only once an hour during the day, and you have to climb the 30 steps up to the platform. There's no help. It's an unmanned station, so you'll have to do it yourself. Councillor Crisp made a comment at the last meeting which really stuck in my mind. He cycled over to East Malling to do his own site visit when we were denied the opportunity to have one, and his words were, "Never again, lucky I survived it." If we think parents are going to let their children ride their bikes on this road to and from school, then we must be mad. And as we heard, somebody unfortunately was injured just the other day, and it doesn't come as a surprise to me when you walk up and down that road, and you have to be careful about how close you are to the edge of the pavement. And as somebody said, the wing mirrors, that's what's going to, even if the car doesn't mount the pavement, you've got to be careful of the wing mirrors. And I just despair that KCC seem unwilling to recognise, let alone address, what is staring us all in the face. It's worth noting that the applicant for the major Bradbourne development has submitted evidence which notes the constrained situation through High Street and Chapel Street as a result of the historic street pattern and the presence of on-street parking, and says that High Street is operating at capacity now. So what you don't do is make a traffic situation better by adding more traffic to it. In terms of the ecology, and particularly the badgers, it seems clear that the land levels are influencing the extent of the buffer, because the internal road would need to drop down into the site before it can turn. And as the buffer is measured, it's from the edge of the wood. The protection for the part of the set in the orchard is very limited. We've got conflicting information about what the applicant intends to do. The applicants say in their technical note 2 that they don't intend to close the set, but will carry out work under a licence. KCC Ecology say a partial closure will be needed, and one of the committee reports noted that the set in the orchard is an outlier and would need to be closed. KCC don't refer to the orchard entrances as outliers. They say the holes are going towards the direction of the wood, suggesting that the set within the the adjacent wood and the holes in the development site are connected. And they also note that the surveys were carried out not at the optimum time of the year, and therefore are not reliable. If, as seems very likely, the applicants need to construct a road within 20 metres of the entrances, they are going to have to need, or they're going to need, a partial closure of the orchard entrances, as KCC predict. The applicant must know their minimum requirements in terms of delivering the access within the site, in terms of how far east they need to go, given the land levels, and they could have shared that to try to make some progress on this particular issue. As it stands, we haven't got details submitted as to why they're not looking firstly at avoiding the harm. And that was, we were talking about the sequential test and not having met that. And regarding the impact on the neighbours' residential amenity, I do think that their ability to enjoy their garden in relative privacy will be significantly diminished. And this arises principally from the height of the access above the garden. As the residents said, it's not about their view. They accept, I think, they haven't got a right to a view. It's the impact from the road on their privacy. And it seems to me that traffic passing one's front door is one thing. Having a new property built next to you might create some minor level of overlooking from a single household, and in that eventuality, you might expect that the property might have obscure glazing in the side elevations. But having a house built next to you, or the road, having a road built next to you at height above the garden, where the public at large will be able to come and go throughout the day. They'll be able to peer into the private spaces at the rear. They'll be able to see through the full height windows on the side. That's a whole other type of harm, I think. I noted on going back through the papers that the LVIA says that at year 15, the impact of the development for the neighbour would remain high. And it also records that there are no windows in the side elevation, which isn't correct. I think there are 2 windows in their side elevation. And the neighbours can't protect themselves by putting up a fence of normal height, as it would have no material benefit because the garden is lower than the access road. It would have to be in the order of 10 feet or more high, which would be, I think, oppressive. And ironically, in the context of the site as it is currently, we would probably say that such a fence would be harmful. So they would be completely reliant on the landscaping being provided and maintained. But in any case, a native hedge wouldn't filter all intrusion, including headlights at all times of year. And I do wonder what the concerns might be around vehicles passing and queuing and pumping out fumes at head height. And the neighbour mentioned the fact that their permitted development rights were removed to preserve the visual amenity and rural character of the locality, which again, slightly ironic, but there you are. So I think when we take all these matters and the cumulative harms into account, I don't think it can reasonably be said that the development should clearly be permitted. And in the exercise of our planning judgment, we could continue with a refusal. I'll leave it there because I think others will wish to speak, but if I could come back afterwards, thank you.
Okay, I have got to admit to, and Mr. Borton, I have seen your hand. I have got to admit to a mistake. The timer did cut Mr. Wilford off early. Would you like to come back and do your speech from the beginning or from where you left off, or up to you? You can go from the beginning if you want. I am very sorry that I've done this. You had another minute.
Thank you, Chair. As I was saying, I failed to understand the committee's position on this scheme when the council has chosen not to defend a Greenbelt appeal in Hadlow for over 70 dwellings, and last week lost an appeal not only in the Greenbelt but in the Kent Downs National Landscape for a HGV truck stop. Much has been made of the appeal defended in Westmoreland 5 years ago. That heritage impacted Grade 1 listed buildings. Nothing has been said about the lost appeal in Winterfield Lane for 250 dwellings, nor the lost appeal in Eccles for 950 dwellings, or the approval of the Gladman scheme around the corner in December by this committee. We do, however, find ourselves in a situation where this committee wants to refuse this modest scheme that is neither in the Greenbelt nor in the national landscape. It sits squarely within the definition of sustainable development as advocated by the NPPF, and sits squarely within the NPPF's requirement to boost significantly the supply of housing in this country. Members, you have a choice tonight. Be part of the problem or be part of the solution to help aid those most in need and the opportunity for home ownership. Thank you.
And I apologise for my mistake. Can I take Mr. Borton? Wait, I know he's got to go to another meeting at 8 o'clock. So could I take him online first? If that's okay.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Oh, hang on. You're blasting us. Try that.
Is that better?
That's better.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm sorry I can't be there in person and that I've got to leave the meeting at 8 o'clock this evening. I'm currently on a training course. I just wanted to make 3 points. The first point, which has been I haven't heard, or I've heard mentioned very briefly this evening, is the impact heading south towards the Waterbury Crossroads. I represent Waterbury within my ward. It is the most polluted part of the borough at the crossroads. We have had many different schemes in and around the area that would have had an impact on the crossroads. It's very regrettable that Kent County Council in particular haven't been more robust about this in their representations so far. I am concerned, I remain concerned about it. However, I recognise that all that's different from the last time this committee met back in January and now is the receipt of a cost report based on recommendations of the committee last month, which I couldn't be at, had come forward. Obviously, I don't have a vote on that this evening, so I'll let members in the chamber make their own mind up on it. But I just wanted to emphasise two further procedural points on this. The first is that I do think a lot of good points have been raised by various public speakers, including the agent. We do need to take into account our housing need and our housing supply, and it's important that we do so. And we do this in a very different policy context to any appeal that that has been mentioned, bar those that have happened pretty much since the turn of the year. And we saw, in terms of the way that much more protected landscape in policy terms was addressed by the inspector at the lorry park in Rootham Heath, as you'll know very well, Chair, just exactly how much the revised National Planning Policy Framework in December is really tilting the balance away from defending sites such as this. So I appreciate that might be an unpopular message, and it's not necessarily one I agree with. I'm very critical of the government changes that have been put in December, but if we have one hand tied behind our back beforehand, we have very, very nearly got two hands tied behind our back. And I think people need to be aware of that, given that planning is, in essence, a legal process. The third point was, I really want to address what was said by Teeston Parish Council, which was based on our constitution. I'm glad that that the representative from Teeston Parish Council has an interest in the Tunbridge and Moorland Borough Council constitution. Officers, whether we agree with their judgment about whether this would meet the criteria for a costs report or not, have got the right in order to bring back that report. And I think it's important that they do, because we do have to recognise that there is cost and work involved in preparing to defend appeals. We have a planning appeals budget as a council, but we need to make sure that we aren't using taxpayers' money in a frivolous way. We've actually got to be realistic with people about what the chances of success at appeal are. I've watched the committee back from January, and I felt that Mr. Bailey and Mr. Gilbert did a very good job, both in terms of helping the proposer and the seconder in articulating the grounds, but also in terms of being very, very clear about their view that there would be a risk of significant costs involved. So they've done exactly the right thing in line with our constitution. The only people who can change the constitution at this council are the elected members. So it's wrong of any parish councillor to pretend otherwise. If elected members of the council have an issue with the constitution, then I'm happy in my capacity as leader of the council to entertain that discussion with them. But the reality is, officers did at the last meeting have the right to do so. I think it is fair, given the representations received, that there are many different aspects to it. And if this isn't to go the way that many of those speaking would like, then clearly there would be a risk of significant costs. And I think that's obvious from the speeches that we've had in this meeting and in previous meetings on this particular subject. So I wish the committee well with its deliberations. I'm about to dial out now, but it's nothing that anyone has said. And I shall look forward to hearing the result when I'm back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wharton. Councillor Rao, did you indicate earlier? Councillor Taylor, I have seen your hand. Councillor Rao.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. I was just making a few notes to reply to there. My apologies if I'm going to cover quite a number of things that have already been said, both by members of the public and by Patton. But because we don't collude our deliberation, there is bound to be some duplication. I would say that following previous two meetings I had, I can be persuaded if the right conditions come, change my ideas on it. But I'd like to start by talking about sustainability. Firstly, in a statement by KCC Highways, they noted the narrow width of the pavement has also been spoken about by members of public employee. I think probably pretty much the same words, which they say will to some extent will discourage pedestrian trips. And they disagree with the conclusion that the site offers good opportunity to travel by modes. They also noted that facilities in it are modest. Just what modest means, I'm not really sure. Oh, sorry about that. I'll get a bit closer then. It also notes that the facilities in East Malling are modest. Just what modest means, I don't know. I've lived in East Malling for 45 years now. And when I moved here, they were modest. We had a couple of shops, a butcher's and 2 general stores. Now we have nothing. So they're less than modest now. You can get your hair cut if you like. That's about it. I should like to say that the developer's view on the site offers good opportunities to say the least is optimistic. I'm surprised they don't say excellent, to be honest. This seems to be where all developers come from. Everything they do is great. Where is there evidence for these good opportunities? I do not consider 1 bus per week in each direction anywhere near as good as it is. In fact, it's appalling. The nearest shopping centre of any size is Quarry Wood. And there is a bus available to get there, some 2,200 metres walk away to the nearest bus stop. And of course, back after you shop. Admittedly, the railway does give access to places further away, such as Maidstone and London, but you're not going to support local facilities by going there. If you go to West Malling on the train, with its limited selection of shops, there is only 1 railway stop away. But even then, there's a walk to the centre of about half a mile, and there's not a sustainable supermarket there, only a Tesco's Metro. So I wanted again to highlight some of the considerations. The route from the site to the village centre is via a footway on the eastern side of the road only, and it's less than 1 metre wide. This is accepted by the applicant in their transport assessments, which is below the minimum width for pavements. Walk side by side, and there is every chance you get caught by a wing mirror. In fact, we've heard tonight 2 or 3 times that a child was hit earlier this week by a wing mirror on a van. Is this something TMC want to be accountable for? On Monday, we were sent some photographs from a resident who lives immediately south of on the opposite side of the road to these bollards. Because vehicles struggle to get through, the bollards protecting the wall keep getting damaged. KCC, they will not replace them. So the residents are not allowed to put them up either. Instead, they would just have to run the risk and deal with the highway themselves. It hardly seems right that they should do that. Gillett's Lane and Rocks Road, as Michelle Tatton has said, both lack drop curbs on both sides to make crossing the road easier. Anybody with mobility problems, especially crossing Gillett's Lane, which is an incredibly steep hill directly away from the main road, is difficult to cross at the best of times. It's not very well used, but the road drops away from the main Walter and Bury Road, and you're standing on an angle trying to cross a road. Drivers regularly mount the pavement in order to pass, especially anything larger than a small van. Vehicles regularly park on the pavement to avoid losing their wing mirrors, but this narrows the pavement even further. A few months ago, a report of a vehicle parked on the walkway was made to the police, and they came along to remove it because it was blocking so much of the pavement you had to walk round it in the road. East Malling train station is just shy of 535 metres from the centre of the site, not 350 metres as it says in the applicant's notes. I believe they've measured that from the actual exit onto the main Wateringbury Road. But there are people that are going to walk further than that from the middle or the back end of the site. So 535 metres is from the centre. It has an hourly service, but each platform is reached by a flight of 30 steps. No good if you're in a wheelchair or pushing a pram, assuming you could even negotiate the pavements to get there. Even the CAA notes that the steps are very steep and they're said to be poorly lit at night, and they certainly are. Quite often not lit at all due to vandalism, etc., which is not the applicant's fault, but it happens. Perhaps the lighting was better when the CAA was done, but the steps are not. The village crossroads in the middle of the village there is 700 metres from the site. It has a church and a public house and a community hall but no shops. Again, 45 years ago, there were 2 shops close to that. They're not there anymore. The nearest convenience store is 1,540 metres away. Doesn't stock a lot. You get a newspaper. There is a post office there. You can buy a pint of milk and a loaf of bread and endless quantities of crisps and sweets. The nearest primary school is just under 1.8 kilometres and the nearest secondary 1.3 kilometres away. Having said that, there are not many children at the secondary school that aren't bussed in by parents, and that causes a major problem during peak hours. The primary school is on the edge of a social housing development, and the majority of those children also get bussed to school by their parents, which is not more than 200 or 300 yards, some of them. So it says a lot about somebody that's going to come just over a mile to it. Are they going to walk? The nearest bus stops from this development are 720 metres away. And the only bus in the village is the school bus, which goes south in the morning and returns after school. You can, as a public, get on that bus if you wish, if you want to fight with the kids that are on there, because it's full every day. And it only goes to East Peckham, nowhere else. As for other buses, the situation is not as the applicant's TA describes, there being one bus every hour on a weekday. It's just the one return service per week. And it runs eastwards through the village on a Friday and returns at 10:30 and returns at 1 p.m. If you catch this bus to West Malling to get your shopping at the metro there, you can't get home after 1 o'clock. So you can't stop for lunch. The nearest bus stop is over 1.5 kilometres away from the development, so less mobile residents would be effectively cut off at this end of the village. Despite what the applicants say, there are no cycle paths at all in East Malling. Cycling in Chapel Street, as we've already heard, is highly dangerous. It's at the best hazardous, but I consider it extremely dangerous. Parents aren't going to let kids cycle to and from school in rush hour. No doubt about it, they will use a car. Just to say that the journey home from the village crossroads to the application site is entirely uphill, not an easy walk, especially if you're pushing a pram or carrying shopping. The development just screams, I need a car to access facilities. This may be a bit facetious, but if this is considered to be a sustainable location, then I must be a monkey's uncle. Just a few more words on the traffic front. And I know we've been told that KCC are the experts in this field. Well, experts can be wrong, you know. I would love to see the evidence for it not being severe. In any court case in the land, evidence must be provided by both sides for an argument for it to stand. We do however, have our own evidence that there are over 3,000 movements a day in each direction on the Wateringbury Road in the vicinity of this proposed development. Now, we also have statements provided by the expert working on behalf of the parish council and by the experts of a developer, that's Gladman's, regarding the traffic from development in Clare Lane, saying that even a modest increase in traffic will severely affect the High Street. If you read High Street, you're then reading Chapel Street and Water and Berry Road because it's just a continuation. I did mention this at the last meeting of this committee. Consider, if this goes ahead, there are 500 new properties in East Malling, 250 at 40 acres, 150 at Clare Lane, and the 52 being discussed this evening. That will be potentially used, and those residents will potentially use this road to gain access to areas south of East Malling. That is Water and Berry and onto Paddock Wood, and as we all know too well, the areas south of Maidstone via Teesson and West Farley. Remember, Water and Berry Crossroads is the worst AQMA in the borough. This traffic will make the route through the High Street, Chapel Street and the Water and Berry Road considerably more dangerous than it already is. Finally, we're told that the development is, if this development is refused, it could, and I repeat, could go to appeal. And then we may be, again, I repeat, maybe, if the appeal was successful, liable to be charged costs or compensations. However, I bring to you all a fact that has also already been spoken about tonight, about a very similar development with similar circumstances, went to appeal following the refusal by Thanet Council, and the appeal was rejected by the inspectors on similar reasons to those being put forward. Having just heard Councillor Bolton, I am disappointed the fact that Councillor Bolton sees defending an appeal as frivolous. Surely it's what we should be doing if we are to appeal is brought. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If I have Councillor Taylor first and then come back to you, Councillor Chris. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you for letting me speak. And I'm sorry I can't be there tonight. Listening to the developer speak earlier, I must admit a tiny tear squeezed from one corner of my eye as he talked about his defence of the silent majority, the homeless. If he's so concerned about them, why doesn't the development industry use the 1.1 million extant planning permissions it has today? KCC, if I understood what was said, KCC aren't 100% convinced about the sustainability of this, something Councillor Tatton remarked on. And Councillor Tatton made a very good point about the cumulative harm of all these. And I think we should be exploring that further to find out if the cumulative harm would actually put us in a position where we might still lose an appeal, but we wouldn't be deemed unreasonable. And if you recall the discussion we had last night, the Constitution's now been changed from significant risk of costs to risk of significant costs, which effectively gives the planning permission, the planning committee, the right to take that risk on a grey application. And there isn't a greyer application than this one. Councillor Roud mentioned one of the bus routes, the shopper buses. What he forgot to say is that we, the parishes, pay for that bus. So why is the developer using it as part of his sustainability argument? And finally, Councillor Bolton did make one valid point. These housing numbers, this need for housing is something that is imposed on us by government. The planning system has been changed so much in the last few years, it's unrecognisable today. And we have to find, as a borough council with our local plan, we have to find 1,100 houses a year. That's 22 developments of this size. They're going to come to every village across the borough. I don't want it. I believe everything that the public and local members have said tonight. This is bad, but we cannot stop it. So we need to be very careful. If you can make a refusal tonight that is a borderline case, that I think is an acceptable way to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Crisp.
Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, well, I can't really believe we're here for the third time, as the application's been refused twice before. But I believe this development is fundamentally wrong on so many levels, and will be a blight on landscape, a blight on wildlife, including protected species, a blight on the road system, which has been mentioned so much tonight and is wholly inadequate and massively dangerous. And as my experience, as you know, on my bike, never again. It is ridiculous, and to walk as well is horrendous. Moving the entrance by 4 metres is not going to change that, and the road will still be terribly dangerous for pedestrians and cyclists. With many housing estates already having gained planning permission a few miles away, the traffic can only be more and more horrendous. I don't believe this development can be sustainable, or the benefits in any way outweigh the harm. But most of all, it will cause a blight on the local people who live in East Malling, including many who have very passionately given their valid reasons to refuse this development again. And it's a shame that you've had to do that. They've engaged professional bodies such as CPRE and independent consultants who have also rejected the plans. This is not NIMBYism. It is a genuine heartfelt plea to preserve their way of life. After all, they will have to live with the consequences. The residents voted for us. We represent them, and our views and decisions should have meaning. I am dismayed at the pressure being brought down on us to accept the development, including accusations of predetermination, the threat of costs further down the line, and the dangling carrot of S106 payments, which can be somewhat unreliable. We as councillors cannot base our decisions on what may or may not happen at a later date. We must base our decisions on the material planning considerations now, as we have done twice before on this particular application. And what is it all for? So the government can tick boxes on another batch of houses built in the wrong place, just to blindly pursue their unachievable housing targets at the expense of local people. It is dictatorial and it's undemocratic, and makes us as councillors somewhat redundant. I urge my fellow councillors to stick to their guns and do not be bullied by bureaucracy. Vote for what you believe is right.
No, no. You know the rules by now. Thank you, Councillor Chris. Right, anybody else? Councillor Thornywell.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. And as at previous meetings, I'm not a member of Area 2, so therefore I can't propose anything and I can't vote at the end of it. But firstly, I just wanted to comment on what the developer said and what Councillor Bolton said. Just to say that in East Malling, we have not been NIMBYs. East Malling residents actually did not raise large numbers of objections and went along with Parkside off New Road being built. And are not in this committee, but I personally voted in Area 3 for the approval of Ditton Edge, which was the other half of the East Malling development, because I recognise there's a need for more houses, and I try to make decisions based on what I think are suitable sites, and I try to take into account the issue of cost, not as a material planning consideration, but just from the point of view of the council. And I've also voted personally for sites off Hermitage Lane, because I did not think that the landscape there was sufficient to meet the tests that are now imposed on us. And I would say the adjoining committee, Area 3, in effect accepted the development at Eccles. It did not seek to raise landscape or any other objection. It just stuck to the outstanding issue of the highway objection. And the effect of doing that was, once that was out of the way, permission inevitably would be given. I'm not aware, to be honest, of the situation in Hadlow that was referred to. And with regard to the application for the lorry place up in Rootham. To be fair to him, Councillor Roud argued at this committee that should be approved. So we're not all NIMBYs. I'm not going to go on because we had a very late meeting last night. I think the residents have raised some important points. And one thing I would ask about, please, is that we've all received from one of the residents pictures of the badger sets. And the badgers inconveniently seem to be moving into the site. And could I ask how we will address the fact that the badgers are not static? We have some badgers in parish council land in Larkfield. They're certainly not static. And the fact that they're there, what is our role, please, in protecting them?
Mr. Bailey. Mr. Gilbert.
Thank you, Chair. If I just come back on the point that Councillor Thorney-Wells raised regarding the migration of badgers on the site, I'll draw your attention to the committee report and conditions 33 and 34 that are proposed. Condition 33, as set out, actually says no earlier than 3 months prior to the commencement of development, an additional badger survey report shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. Should the position insofar as it relates to badgers have changed from that originally reported when the application was submitted, new survey report should incorporate revised badger mitigation plans. So effectively, condition 33 does actually mean that at the time that the development is going to commence, the developer would have actually had to revisit the buffer zone that's been proposed. And following on from that, condition 34, prior to first occupation, a report prepared by an appropriate qualified and experienced ecologist demonstrating the implementation of the badger mitigation enhancement measures as set out in the badger survey report shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. So whilst the plan actually shows an indicative area regarding badger mitigation at this particular stage, when it comes to the further actual details, if the development got that far, it would actually be picked up by planning conditions and have to be reassessed.
Page 31.
Thank you for that answer. But just to say, as a general view, I do regard this application as having a bad impact on heritage and the countryside, south of East Malling, landscape, and indeed the conservation area. And I do think that, as is indicated, more traffic will have a bad effect on the conservation area. And I personally think there is an arguable case.
Mr. Bailey,
going to add on that basis, I mean, those conditions effectively reflect what the West Badger Group confirmed, that if permission were to be granted, they would seek those conditions imposed, effectively what the condition suggested previously. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Dean.
Thank you, Chairman. Following up on Mr. Thorney-Wells' remarks, I would also like to say that my parish is also not NIMBY at the preparation of the last local plan, and indeed, I hope with the next one. We had a series of public meetings at which we had represented all of the sites available. We asked members of the public to vote, and we based our representations to the Borough Council for the local plan on the basis of what they voted, and that's the way it should be done. I think we all agree that. However, we're not in that position because, as we all know, unfortunately, we don't have a local plan now. And indeed, we've not had one or even a development plan since 2007. And that has left this borough in an extraordinarily vulnerable position and means that we all have to be extremely careful about the way that we go about looking at the applications we're receiving now. Chairman, so much has been said so many times. I want to try and not repeat what other people have said. So please forgive me if what I say ends up being a little disjointed. Some of the papers that we have received suggested to us that the grounds for refusal on heritage grounds were not in accordance with the National Planning Performance Framework, and in particular referred to paragraphs 215 and 217. I wanted just to read them, Chairman, because I think that's the only way you can resolve this. Paragraph 216 says the effect of an application on the significance of a non-designated heritage asset should be taken into account in determining the application. In weighing applications that directly or indirectly affect non-designated heritage assets, non-designated, by the way, for members of the public means non-listed. A balanced judgment will be required, having regard to the scale of any harm or loss and the significance of the heritage asset. It doesn't say what the outcome should be. It doesn't say how points should be awarded. It doesn't even say on the basis of what that judgment should be made. It just says that we have to weigh the application and we have to take different things into account. And that is what we're trying to do. Paragraph 2.215 says where a development proposal will lead to less than substantial harm to the significance of a designated heritage asset, this harm should be weighed against the public benefits of the proposal, including where appropriate, securing its optimum viable use. So again, it just says you have to make a balance. It doesn't say any more or less than that. I agree with Councillor Tatton that the grounds on which we've been putting forward grounds for refusal are a basis for refusing this application. Chairman, Councillor Thornywell and I were both involved very closely in the appeal which the applicant referred to at West Malling, which was some 5 years ago, but was only about 3/4 mile to a mile away from the site that we're looking at now. And so I've spent some time going back over her decision, the decision of the inspector there, because that one also went to appeal, to see what we can learn from her judgments. And what she says at the outset is, I'm quoting, "I must consider this appeal in the light of duties that require that special regard shall be had to the desirability of preserving any listed building or their setting or any features of special architectural or historical interest which they possess, and special attention should be paid to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character or appearance of the conservation area." That seems to me to set out very clearly that heritage is the basis of her decision for an area very similar to what we're looking at now. We were looking at an edge of settlement area. The applications in both the cases at St Mary's Abbey and at West Malling Station were 65 and 75 houses, not wholly different from what we're looking at now, both in areas which I would regard as rural characters, with rural characters, narrow lanes, and at that time the Borough Council had less than 3 years of land supply. And the bulk of the site in both cases was not in the conservation area. This was not just based on the conservation area status of St Mary's Abbey. It was based on the setting of that and other heritage buildings. But the one point that I wanted to repeat was the one that Councillor Tatton and Councillor Taylor also commented on, which is that the grounds for refusal can be the result of a holistic judgment on a wide variety of different kinds of issues that we believe are important in preserving our local area. And in her judgment on St Mary's Abbey, the inspector puts a sort of shopping list at the end of her opinion and allocates weight to a number of different indicators. And I'll just go through them because they won't take long. Benefit of housing, she applies significant weight to that, as I think we all do. Open space, she awards some weight to it, but points out that it can be damaging to tranquility. For jobs, she gives very limited weight. For proximity to services, not very much in Westmoreland because actually they're pretty close. Interestingly, Section 106, this is the payments that developers make for services that they can't provide on their own site. She says that she disregards it basically because that's what you expect. It's part of the requirement if you're going to build a development. So we shouldn't be swayed by the offer of Section 106 payments. And finally, she says on the setting of the conservation area and of listed buildings and of non-listed buildings, she attaches great weight, particularly when viewed from the countryside. So again, we go back to the same sort of area as we're looking at now, and all of those apply. So again, there are direct parallels. And the suggestion has been made to us that the harm to a conservation area must come from inside the conservation area itself. That's not what happened in Westmoreland. As I've said right at the beginning, the case there was not inside the conservation area. The bulk of the site was not. And the inspector refers to vehicles that were travelling outside of the conservation area, but with visible within it. And she talks about the visible and audible effect of passing traffic, even in the area where she is assessing the building application right next door to Westmoreland Station. And she's very interesting about that. She says that there is no settled definition of tranquility. It is essentially a state of mind. It's a judgment by the individual. The modern intrusion of traffic does not necessarily undermine the prevailing quality and distinctiveness of predominantly characterful rural approach to a historic settlement. He talks about distinctive tree-lined approach and gets quite poetic about canopies and areas of rural approach. But they are all equally applicable to this development here. And so I arrive at the same judgment again, that we can use these kinds of grounds for refusal in a very similar area, very near to what we are looking at there. The final point that I want to make is that the inspector in Westmoreland concludes that she is entitled to arrive at a decision that the sum total of the things that she looked at, all the things that I've just talked about, allow her to decide that there is sufficient argument for turning down the application that she was looking at then, and deciding that her priority should be the tranquility of Westmoreland Abbey and the preservation of the building and of the conservation area around it, which is predominantly agricultural. My belief is that we are equally able and entitled to arrive at the conclusion that in this site, the optimum use is an orchard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Councillor Tanner, do you want to come back? Councillor Banks, did you want to? No. Do you wish to come back, and do you wish to make a proposal at this stage, or do you want to?
Yes, I do, please. Come on, yes. I think it's clear from all of us that we would want to uphold the grounds of refusal. Actually, before I say anything else, it was said by the applicant that councillors are part of the problem. And I put my hand up after that to speak. David sort of covered a lot of it, but no, I didn't object to the sweetings. I think in all cases, certainly what I try to do is consider whether it is development in the right place and whether you can adequately mitigate the harms or not. And I think it's quite clear from everything that we've heard and how we've considered the application and the detail that we see that that can't be done. So it's not a case of not in my backyard. It's a case of looking at the detail and considering whether it's a development that is going to work, both for the people who are going to live there and the people who live there now. So I do think that was a very unfair comment. So I think on the basis that we would want to, I think, move with the grounds of refusal, it did strike me that perhaps we could look at those grounds to see whether we are content with them as they are or whether they could be improved in some way, in the sense that we could perhaps make things a little bit clearer. Officers helped us on the night, to put those together, but it may be that moving forward and taking it to full council, we would just want to make sure that those are absolutely right as we would want them to be. And it did strike me that at the very least we could separate out the different heritage harms, so that perhaps we would have the first. Perhaps we could go through. It's possibly will get a little bit complicated, but I will try my best to be logical with it.
How would you want to approach this?
What I might suggest, instead of lots of backwards and forwards, is maybe we just, if we have a discussion between Councillor Tath and anyone who's, I know there's no motion at this time, but maybe have a discussion first and foremost to look and see if we can refine those agreement between ourselves first. So, break for 10 minutes, we can then do that. We can then look to see what grounds we can come forward, and then obviously we could then, once we've got an agreement, we can come back to members, read them out, but maybe put them on the screen so that members of the public can see what we've got, and then that's probably the best way forward. Yeah.
If the rest of the councillors are happy that we'll take a 10-minute break for some wording to be put together, if that's okay. Thank you, public, for 10 minutes. So back here at 22. Sorry, we're just going to take a few more minutes. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to resume your seats, please, we may continue. Thank you. While we sort out the technical details of sharing the screen, Councillor Tatton and Ms Gilbert and Mr Bailey have sorted out six reasons for refusal. We will need to do a proposal when we've gone through these and a seconder, and then have a vote. There you are. Yeah, there you are. That's what you look like when we have meetings. Yes. I'm sure you are aware that if the proposal is to reject the application, that if that is carried, it still doesn't mean it's rejected. It then goes to full council. Full council is in April. So just to not get anybody overexcited, depending on what happens there, whether it goes to appeal or not is then, and it could go to appeal from either side, couldn't it, Mr. Thornywell? Is it going? So Mr. Bailey is going to share with us what he and Councillor Tatton have discussed and worked out. I'll hand over to him.
Right, I haven't got a mouse on me, so I can't move, I can't zoom in. So hopefully if members can strain and see what I've got on there. So I'm going to read it out first, but you've just for the aid of members of the public, you can see the grounds there. So ground one, and these are variations on effectively what was previously voted on in terms of the 4 grounds of refusals. They've just been slightly extracted to some degree. So ground one is the development will cause less than substantial harm to the setting of the designated heritage assets of Huntley Cottage. We agreed not to put in and the barn for the reasons it's not a designated heritage asset, so that was taken out of that ground. Ivy House Farm and barn, and to the setting of the non-designated heritage assets of Belvedere Oast, contrary to policy CP1 of the core strategy in paragraphs 213 of the NPPF. Ground 2 was the development would cause less than substantial harm to the East Malling Conservation Area, again contrary to policies, sorry, as I'm doing it on policy CP6, CP24 and SQ1 of the core strategy in paragraphs 215 and 220 of the NPPF, and also contrary to the East Malling Conservation Area appraisal. Ground 3 is the development will cause harm to the distinctive and historic landscape character and appearance of the area, contrary to policies CP1, CP6, 24 and SQ1 of the core strategy in paragraphs 187 of the NPPF. Ground 4 is the development is unsustainable, the site being outside the confines of East Malling with limited sustainable and active travel options that could reasonably meet the needs of all residents from the development, which in turn will lead to an unacceptable reliance on the private motor car. As such, the development is contrary to policies, again, CP1, 2, and 25 of the core strategy in paragraphs 115 and 117 of the NPPF. Ground 5 is the applicant has failed to demonstrate to the LPA that they have applied the sequential test relating to protected species with the prioritisation of avoidance over mitigation and lastly compensation. As such, the LPA cannot be sufficiently confident that development in accordance with the submitted parameter plan would adequately protect protected species on the site and immediately adjacent to it. The proposals are therefore contrary to policies NE2 and NE3 of the MDE DPD 2010 and paragraphs 193A of the NPPF. Ground 6 is the development by virtue of the height of the access road and difference in land levels in proximity to the boundary of number 51 Waterbury Road will result in overlooking a loss of amenity to the occupants of that property that cannot be satisfactorily ameliorated by landscape proposals. Such the development is contrary to policies CP1 and CP24, the core strategy, and paragraph 135 of the NPPF. Those are the grounds that I think we've agreed with Councillor Tatton. So
Okay.
back to Chairman.
So, Councillor Tatton, would you like to make a proposal?
I would like to move those grounds of refusal. Yes, please.
You have a seconder? Many hands? Pick one. Okay, we will now go to a vote. So, oh no, not yet. Okay, Mr. Bailey, you'd like to come back.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Obviously, as I said previously, these are variations on the previous grounds. Members have obviously had the issues in terms of the legal advice that you've had before at this meeting. I also do consider in terms of part of the Constitution that those grounds are unsustainable. And I would ask the legal officer who's present on the call to come back and cite the relevant parts of the Constitution in terms of by me saying that I think those grounds are unsustainable. Thank you.
Joy.
Thank you, James, Chair. So I'm just going to read out the second part of 15.25 of the Part 4 rules, the committee procedure rules. So the legal report has indicated that there would be a risk of significant costs being awarded against the council at appeal. So the committee may not determine the application in a manner contrary to the advice set out in the report. And a resolution by the committee to make such a determination will be a recommendation only, and the applications will stand adjourned to council for determination. So depending on what decision is made with regards to the proposal, I've just read that out, so you're just aware of that of that section of the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Are we ready to go to a vote now? You're happy? You want anything else you need to say? No. Okay, so we are going to a vote based on refusal on the grounds as put together by Councillor Tatton and the officers. Victoria, would you like to?
Thank you. Councillor Banks.
For the changed amendment.
Councillor Crisp.
For.
Councillor Dean.
For.
Councillor Rao.
For.
Councillor Tatton.
For.
And I'm
Councillor Palmer.
afraid I'm against. I do have reason.
Thank you. That's 5 in favour, 1 against.
Okay, right, ladies and gentlemen, as I said before, this goes to full council, so we will do the whole thing from the very start yet again in April. So if you could just hold on a second while I can close the meeting. We have had a number of appeals go through, of which we have won, I think, 3 or 4 of them. The officers have won about 3 or 4. We, as you have heard this evening, did not win the one for Moto, which is 200 truck site that will join Borough Green Plat and Rootham into one solid lump. But that's what the officer, what the inspector has decided. We have no exclusion of press or play. We have no part 2s. So everybody else is happy. I will close this meeting at 9:09. Thank you.
That's much better than last night.
Well done, Wendy.
Night, everybody online. Thank you for
Bye.
coming.
Good night.
Good night, all.